Hello everyone, Charlene here. Today I'm sharing my favorite technique with you, which is combining a stenciled background with stamped images. It creates a beautiful result. I'll be working with a few new products from Hero Arts. I have here the Coastal Blooms Heroscape Stamp and Cut. It is a beautiful layering stamp set that creates a fence with hydrangea flowers. I'll show you how to do that, and it comes out beautifully. There are coordinating dies that come along with this set, and then for the background, we're going to be combining those stamped images with a beautiful layering stencil background. This is the Color Layering Harbor Stencil. It is a beautiful 3-piece stencil set that creates a seaside with a beach. You have the ocean, some boats, as well as a beautiful sky. So let's start by stamping out our Heroscape images. I'm starting with an A2 sized piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock that's 80 pounds, and I'm placing it inside of my stamping platform. Next, I will take out the main fence piece from my packaging, and I'm going to lay this across the bottom of my cardstock, making sure that the bottom portion of the stamp goes right along that bottom portion of the cardstock. I'll be using 2 different ink colors from the Hero Arts core line of inks. I have here sand as well as wet cement. I'll be starting with the sand, but first I'm going to condition my stamp with an Altenew stamp conditioner. This works really well for solid stamps to ensure that you get good coverage with your ink. I'll bring in my sand ink first and make sure to ink up the stamp really well. Then go ahead and flip this over and apply pressure. Then what I generally do, and you'll see this throughout the video, is stamp twice to build up color. It would look nice with one stamping, but I feel like a second stamping really helps to solidify the colors. Next, I'll bring in the detail portion of the fence. This is going to give us some darker areas to the fence, give us that depth and dimension. So I line this up right over the first stamp. I'm bringing in the wet cement. This is a brownish gray tone, and you're going to see in a little while I do change my mind on this. You can see this stamp not only adds detail to the fence, you can see it looks a lot more 3D, but it also adds some underbrush in there back behind the fence. Next, I'll bring in the base layer of the greenery, and this is going to line up right along the top of our fence that we've created here. I'm using 2 different greens for this greenery area of my scene. I have Green Hills and Fresh Lawn. So I'll go ahead and pick this up, and it's kind of backwards, I think, of what would be intuitive. You want to use your lighter color for the stamps that are larger, that have more space, because when you layer the next color on top, that is going to create a darker color. So I've stamped twice here with Green Hills, and you can see it's this nice vibrant green. So now I'll bring in the detail layer of that, layer it over the top, making sure it fits into those little open spaces that are left. And I'll stamp this here in the Fresh Lawn. So now where I stamp the Fresh Lawn on top of our Green Hills, it's going to give us a darker green color and leave behind those little openings of the Green Hills. So there, look at that beautiful 3D effect that creates. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. So I'll build that color up with a second stamping, and now you can really see all of that definition. I decided at this point I wanted that underbrush to be green. So I brought back in the stamp that created the detail on the fence and that underbrush area, and I'm bringing in moss. Moss is this nice greenish brown color, so it's going to go really well with that wet cement that I already used, but not be too green so that it competes with our Green Hills and Fresh Lawn. So lift that up and look, oh gosh, it creates so much more detail having a different bold color back behind there from the fence, a light to a dark. You can really see the difference now. Did a second stamping, and now I'll bring back in my layer stamps, and I'll do the floral portion, the hydrangea. We have a lot of hydrangea flowers here in Washington where I live, and they are all in bloom right now. So I had a lot of inspiration looking around and seeing them as I was creating this card. I knew I wanted to do a nice blue and purple combination. So I'm bringing in mist, periwinkle, and orchid. Now for this solid stamp area, again, I'm conditioning, and then I'll bring in mist. Mist is a really nice light blue, so I'll ink up my stamp really well there, flip and press. You can see what a beautiful light blue that is. I'm going to stamp it a second time to really help build it up. If I wanted to keep my hydrangea flowers really kind of nice and simple, I would just bring in maybe a slightly darker color, but I wanted some big and bold hydrangeas. So I'm going to get the detail layer here, line it up right over the areas where the mist was, lift that up, and I'm going to do a fun combo here with the periwinkle and orchid. So just a little fun thing to remember, you don't always have to use just one color of ink on a stamp. You can bring in different colors. I like to use the corner or the edge of my ink pad to apply the ink when I'm doing this technique. So I'm dabbing the periwinkle all around, but not completely covering the stamp. Once I've got a good amount on there, I'll go ahead and flip and press this on. And then I'm going to bring in the orchid. I'll do a similar thing here with the orchid, using that edge along the stamp and adding some ink here and there, just kind of dabbing. It's easier to do multiple layers with less, because then you can build up the color how you want it rather than putting too much on at first. So I kind of err on the side of less is more, and then decide if I want to add more. I added a few more layers of color, and you can see we have this nice variation with the hydrangeas. Very, very pretty. Bringing in the coordinating die, and have some low tack tape here to hold it in place so I can cut this out with my die cutting machine. This die also cuts out some of the inset pieces from the fencing, which makes for a really nice finished image. Moving on to our background, I have an A2 size piece of Neenah Solar White 80 pound, and you can see this would look really nice as is with an ink blended background or maybe a colored piece of cardstock, but I want this card to really pop. So I'm bringing in those Harbor stencils to do my stenciled background, and you're gonna see this just brings it up to another level, which is why I love this technique. It makes for a really visually interesting finished card. The color layering stencils here are made up of 3 stencils. It's going to create a beach with sailboats and the water as well as the sky. I'll start by putting my cardstock down on my Altenew sticky mat and bringing in the first layer of the stencil. I'm going to place it so that the top portion goes right over the cardstock, because our sky is going to be there at the top, and I want to make sure I don't have any lines along the top there. I'm bringing in the same mist ink. So I'm going to be using pretty much all of the same inks on the stencils that I did on the stamped images. And this mist I'm going to bring all the way across, just lightly coloring things in and building up the layers until I'm happy. And I'll do this on all of the open areas of this first stencil. Once I'm happy with how much ink is on there, I can go ahead and remove the first stencil, and you can see it already is starting to look good even with just that first layer. Now I have the second layer. It's going to line up right along the horizon line that the first stencil created, and this I will bring in the periwinkle. Same thing, working the ink into my bristles and going over all the openings until I'm happy with the amount of color that's on there. I'm going to make that bottom portion pretty dark, you can see, and then the top portion I'm going to go very light, so that way you can see that there's a difference between where the ocean is and where the sky is. Now I can remove the second layer of the stencil. I love how that just automatically creates the cards. So fun. This third stencil is going to create the shore as well as the lovely sailboat. So I want to bring this in so that the shoreline where the surf hits the sand is right underneath where our ocean is. So I will line that up, and then I'm going to bring in some orchid ink. This is a little unconventional. My ships are going to be orchid, my sailboats, but it's going to tie in beautifully, I think, with the hydrangeas that we created. So lightly working over the top until I get some ink on there, then building up the color. Now I'm bringing in the periwinkle. Why? Because I want to darken up the bottoms of my sailboats. Not too much. I'm just going to lightly bring in that periwinkle and darken up the bottoms of those boats. It helps create some interesting visual depth to the stenciled image. Now I'll bring in my sand again, and starting off lightly, then building up the color all along that bottom portion, being careful not to go too far up because I don't want to pull any of that blue down into the bottom. For my sentiment, I am stamping hello and miss you from the Heroescape. I end up using hello, but I like to stamp out multiple sentiments and then make my decision once I'm putting my card together. I find that much easier, and then I can just tuck that extra sentiment back into my packaging and have it on hand for another card. Now we can put the card together. I'm going to start here by trimming off the little bit of white that we have there along the bottom of our fence. And then I'm going to add some Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape. This is a lower loft foam tape. It is one of my favorites. It works beautifully to add dimension to your card. I'm also going to add some to the back of my hello sentiment, and so I'm cutting tiny little pieces here to put on there. I have all our pieces ready to go. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back in my brush that I used for the orchid, and just using what is on my brush, I'm going to bring in a really small amount of that orchid along the top of the card and a little bit onto the sides of the card. And what that's going to help to do is it's going to help to kind of create bookends, right? Because that we have that dark fence and underbrush behind the fence, and then we'll have a little bit of a darker color along the top of the card. So that helps to keep everything contained inside of our little scene. A trick I like to use when I have a piece with foam tape that I'm going to layer over something is to use my scoreboard. So I'm going to take my base stenciled piece here, I'm going to put it right into the corner of my scoreboard, and then I'm going to remove the release tape from my foam tape on the back of our fence piece. If you're worried about this moving around in here, you can very easily take a piece of low tack tape and just hold down the bottom right hand corner, and then it won't move on you at all. And then we can take the piece with foam tape on it and just butt it right into the corner before we lay it down. So once it's in the corner, I'll lay it down over my stenciled piece, and it's going to line up with the bottom and the side perfectly. You can see when I flip this over, there is nothing showing. Looks great. Adding some glue to the back of the completed panel, and I will glue this to an A2 sized card base. I had initially planned to put my sentiment up towards the top right hand corner, but color can play into your choices that you make when you're putting together a card. Because we have a lighter background and I've used a white cardstock for the sentiment, I really like how the sentiment pops over the darker area of the card. So I'm going to place my sentiment down here over the hydrangea bush. Lastly, to add a little bling, I have some gems here from Spellbinders, and that creates our finished card. You can see we have all of these beautiful layers with that lovely stenciled background and then our stamped images over the top. You can do this with any combination of a stenciled background and stamped images. Really place those stamped images anywhere on top of the card. That's why I love this technique. It just creates a really beautiful result. I hope that all of you picked up some tips and tricks today. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit the notification bell so that you'll know about future videos here on the Scrapbook and Cards Today YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.